Hey y'all, it's Jennifer. Welcome back to my channel. Today I am coming to you with my June wrap up. This is like the first time I've sat in front of a camera in what feels like a really long time. Most of what you have been seeing from me has been pre-filmed, and I love that for past me. I'm so glad that she did that for me. It has been a really hectic past couple of weeks, so I'm sorry that I haven't been getting to replying to comments very quickly, but I'm hoping to catch up on that. But I thought if I didn't do this now, I don't know when I would put up a June wrap up, but June has to be my most successful reading month of the year. I think I read 10 books. That may not sound like a lot compared to a lot of booktubers who I know read like 13 to 15 books a month, but this is easily like the highest number that I think I have ever read in a month. So let's go on and get into the books. This is going to be in no particular order. I feel like I've talked about a lot of these in different places in recommendations videos and like my mid-year book freakout tag, because not only was this my most read month, this is also a month I think with a lot of really high ratings from me. So I feel like some of these you have heard me talk about elsewhere. I might save those till the end. But what I really did want to start with was books that I didn't have physically, just so that I don't forget them. So the first book that I want to talk about is Maddalena and the Dark, which was one of my most anticipated releases of the year. I forgot that I pre-ordered it, so it was a shock to me when this downloaded to my Kindle. But this is semi-dark academia. It is historical fiction that is set in the 1700s in Venice, and it is about like a music school where orphaned young girls go and they are trained up in music. So the dark academia quality was kind of around learning about music, which I think is really fascinating because I'm not a musician, but I thoroughly enjoy listening to music. I thoroughly enjoy music, and I've always wanted to understand it more. So I feel like I'm always really attracted to books that discuss music in some way because I think it's really interesting. It's a world that I just know nothing about. But this follows two main characters, one named Maddalena and one named Louisa. And Maddalena is kind of a rich girl who comes to the school in a roundabout way. The school is for orphans, but Maddalena has a family. In fact, she has a very rich family in Venice, and everyone in the school kind of pivots around her. They're trying to figure out what their relationship to her should be, and maybe more specifically, what is her relationship to them. And Louisa is one of the girls in the school. Louisa is a far more enjoyable character to read about. Maddalena is very complex, and she becomes more unlikable as the book goes on, but there is also a supernatural element to this that is kind of like them making a deal with the city, which is represented by this like mystery gondolier who will take them out into the lagoon. And I cannot express to y'all enough how much I loved this. I have thought about it so much since finishing it. I have almost wanted to bump the rating up to 5 stars. I think I gave it 4. The writing is so pretty. The writing is really pretty. My only critique is, really, what was the plot here? I don't know what it was. I didn't really care because to me the book was all about the vibes. It was all about the aesthetic of being in Venice and kind of supernatural things happening in Venice, which if you were going to have like a supernatural dark academia set anywhere, I feel like it has to be Venice. So I just really liked the vibe. I liked the aesthetic. I loved the writing. I loved how the city of Venice operated almost like a character in and of itself in the story. I just really loved this. But when I'm thinking about it objectively and I'm trying to think of what was achieved, like what was the actual plot of this book, I am really left scratching my head because I really don't know what the through line of this was. Of course, there were plot elements, but it was more about the characters. It was more about Louisa and Maddalena and their relationship to each other, which kind of went from friendship to something more back again. It was really complex, and one thing that I just loved about this book was one of the characters has an affair with a man, and the way that attraction was described, the way that your first love was described in this, it was breathtaking to me. I just loved this. I mean, I really did. This was one of my most anticipated releases of the year, and it definitely did not let me down. But I have seen some mixed reviews on it since it came out this month. I would be interested to know how most people feel about it. I think this one will be pretty split down the middle. I just feel like you're gonna either love it or hate it, but I absolutely loved it. In fact, I'm thinking about bumping it up to 5 stars. The other book that I don't have physically is Pageboy by Elliot Page. This is Elliot Page's memoir, and I got this on audio because I heard he was reading the audiobook, and that was enough for me. Apparently, I love to read celeb memoirs by listening to them do the audiobook. But this experience has taught me something about myself, which is that apparently I just don't understand the memoir genre, and I don't understand how they are meant to be laid out as a book, because there was a lot about this that just didn't add up to me. I felt like we jumped around. I just was looking for something a little bit more linear, and I guess that's what I've always thought a memoir was you telling your life from beginning to the point that you're at currently. And this one hopped around. It's not the only memoir that I've read this year even that did that. So I guess I really just don't understand the format of a memoir. Anyways, I loved this. I am not going to rate it. I think I'm going to stop rating memoirs because it just feels weird to me to put a rating on you telling your life story. But Elliot Page is a trans actor, and I just really appreciated the attention to detail in this memoir about his trans experience. That is not at all what the memoir is about. It is truly about his life, but being trans is part of his life. And so I think it's interesting how people have discussed the memoir, because he certainly did not set out to like explain trans existence to you, and he didn't need to. But I do think he opened my eyes a little bit more to body dysmorphia, which I have never seen anyone describe in the way that he did. So I thought that was really interesting. One thing that I do wish was done better was maybe just in general the prose. Now, I'm the odd one out because I've seen a lot of reviews say they thought this was just absolutely beautifully written. And so maybe that's just me. Maybe it was that I consumed it via audiobook and I wasn't reading the words on the page. But this was really interesting. It was a hard thing to read, definitely. But I really appreciated it. I think it was a great memoir. I love a celebrity memoir. I mean, what can I say? There's just something about it. And really the through line of this, like the theme for the memoir and kind of how Elliot Page structures his whole life narrative, how he describes his life to you, is kind of through romantic relationships, which were important to him at different phases in his life. And I thought that was a really brilliant way to do it. It was really refreshing. It was just wonderful to read. So I really enjoyed this one. I also treated myself to a reread of A Tale of Two Cities this month. I guess I technically started this back in May, but it certainly spilled over into June. And I cannot express to y'all how much I love this book. This has reignited my love for Charles Dickens. I'm currently reading another Charles Dickens book right now. I don't know what it is about him. I feel like I must, on some level, have kind of a love-hate relationship with his writing, because it feels like nearly every book of his that I have read since A Tale of Two Cities, which was one of, I think, the first three of his that I read, it seems like every other book of his that I have picked up has been a DNF for me. And often I have felt like it might be a hard DNF, like it genuinely might be a book that I don't come back to, which I think is so weird. When I first started out with him, I thought, oh, for sure, this is one of my new favorite authors. But I have had so many ups and downs with him as an author that it's just odd to me. So I just don't even know how to categorize him. I thought he was one of my favorite Victorian authors. I don't really know. But A Tale of Two Cities is so brilliant that it honestly does make me reevaluate my relationship with him. Maybe he still is a favorite Victorian author. I don't know. But I think my thing with A Tale of Two Cities is it's historical fiction. And I just love that. I love classic historical fiction. There is something really special about it. So I know I'm set up to love it from that aspect. And it's about the French Revolution. So it's set up to be very sad, very tragic. The writing is absolutely gorgeous. Kind of the symmetry of London versus Paris is just insane to me. But everything else about the book in so many ways falls flat. Like when I am thinking objectively about the characters in this, when I think about other books of Charles Dickens's that I have read, even the ones that I haven't enjoyed, even the ones that I've DNF'd, I remember the characters more than I do the plot. This is the opposite for me. I remember like the vibe. I remember the prose style. I remember scenes where the mob is present, but I do not remember anything about the characters. It has been only 1 month since I read this. It's been in the same month. I don't remember much of anything about most of the characters. There is one character in this book who carries the novel on his back because he is the only fully fledged character that I can think of in the narrative. And it's so good for him. The story is definitely his. The ending of the book is just the crescendo of his life. It's incredible to read. But I just feel like his story is weakened by other aspects of the novel being weak. And so I don't even know if I should rate this 5 stars or not, but going on emotion, just going on emotional pull, I have to give the book 5 stars. But if I'm being critical about it, this is not his strongest work, and I feel like a lot of people read this in school and really hated it. And I can see why you would. I can just see why someone would not take to this. I really am glad it wasn't my first introduction to Charles Dickens, but I don't know. It's actually one of my favorite books of his. So I still don't know what that says about me and him as an author and our relationship, because I just think there were more weaknesses here than strengths, but the strengths were so strong that I ignore all of the other flaws in it. But if I'm really doing a review, I just think you have to talk about the fact that the characters are really weak, and sometimes the plot is really weak. There are so many sections in this book where time passes and they're like, oh, it's a year later, and you're thinking nothing in that year was important for us to know. That really would have furthered our knowledge of the characters, but it never comes. Anyway, this truly is the best of times, the worst of times, because I was at war with myself the entire time I was rereading it, but it's definitely one of my favorite books of his, and I rated it 5 stars, so I don't know what that says about me. I feel like the other books in my stack can be separated into 2 groups. They can go together because they're by 2 authors. So we're just going to talk about Ninth House here, which is also dark academia fantasy, weirdly enough. I don't know that I would call Maddalena and the dark academia specifically. And in fact, I think the argument could be made that Ninth House is also not really dark academia. Ninth House is an adult fantasy thriller that is set at Yale with secret societies who have magic. There are 2 point of views in this story. One is our main character, Alex, and the other is a man called Darlington who kind of leads Alex around Yale. Alex is someone who has been admitted to Yale and admitted to these secret societies because of an ability that she innately has. So she's technically not an academic in the way that Yale normally wants. So that's the interesting conversation that this book has about education. And in general, what this series has about education is people's right to knowledge and how you work for it. Do you deserve to be there? There's a very big class discussion underlying this book and the second book, Hellbent. I am reading Hellbent right now, and I am just loving it. And I personally think Hellbent really taps into dark academia a little bit more than this one does. But I just really, really loved this. I gave this 4 stars. I originally read this in 2019 when it first came out, and it was one of my worst books of the year. I think I gave it 2 stars. Leigh Bardugo, at the time in 2019, I would have said Leigh Bardugo was my favorite author. I think now I have seen Leigh Bardugo disappoint me a little bit too much to consider her a favorite author, and it's hard to discuss a favorite author when you've really only loved something from them that was all written in the same world, so you don't necessarily know what they're capable of as an author. So I was really excited about Ninth House because I wanted to see what she could do outside of the Grishaverse. And I was so immensely disappointed by it. I really want to go back. I think I've hidden all of those videos now, but I would really like to go back and see what my initial review of this was, because I don't understand what I didn't love about it. The only thing I can think of is that assault is very graphically described in this book. There is a scene of incredibly graphic assault early on, and then assault is kind of a theme that the book talks about a lot. And I think that really, really upset me on first reading because I was not warned about it. The only thing I really want you to warn me about going into a novel is essay. I do not want to see it. I especially do not want to see it done graphically. And that's what happened in this book. And I think that possibly just upset me so much that I lowered my rating for the book and I couldn't even enjoy it because I just thought it was graphic. This time around, I was well prepared for it. I really wanted to revisit this because so many people have loved Hellbent this year that it made me want to come back to this series. I am so glad that I did. It's interesting because I do remember that the first time I read this, I hated the main character, Alex, and I loved Darlington, who is kind of like this gentleman scholar that shows her around Yale. He's really just a big academic, and she's not really into that. And this time around, I loved her, and I didn't really care for him at all. He eventually did grow on me, but I just thought that was interesting to think about how different I am now to who I was in 2019 pre-pandemic. And I think pre-pandemic, I probably wanted to be the gentleman scholar. I wanted to be the academic to show you around. I wanted to be entrenched in academia. Now, that's not me. That's not me anymore. And so I just think I was kind of disillusioned with who Darlington was and what he represented, which is so interesting. I really, really loved this. I loved that there was a mystery element to it. I loved the characters. I think this will be kind of slow for a lot of people because there is just a lot of attention given to the characters, but it's so special to me, honestly. I rated it 4 stars. I am really loving Hellbent. I'm interested to see how I feel about that. But I do feel like Hellbent is more fully discussing knowledge and dark academia in a way that I appreciate. I feel like this was just very insular in a way. Hellbent feels like it's really discussing larger topics, which is very interesting to me. So I am excited to finish Hellbent, but this one got 4 stars from me. Let's talk about them. Let's talk about the folk of the Air Trilogy. I intended to vlog this because when I started the first book, The Cruel Prince, I was like, wow, this is fantastic. And I think I'm going to want a reading vlog devoted to this so that I can look back on my first reading experience with it. I read them so fast, there was literally no way to film a reading vlog on this. This is a Fae series that is about our main character, Jude, whose parents were killed by the Fae. And so she has kind of come into the Fae world. She has been raised among them, but she's always been othered. And essentially the first book is her deciding that she wants revenge on all of the Fae that have really bullied her because she is human. This series was far more political and far more thriller heavy in a way to me than what I ever would have anticipated. There was so much going on. I truly did not know what was going to happen next. I think this is often sold as a series that is about romance, that is a Fae romance. The romance is there, it's incredible. Chef's kiss, I mean, absolutely amazing enemies to lovers romance, but that is not what the series is at all. And it specifically does not play a large role in the first book, which I just think is really interesting. I don't know why that is something that people latched onto. I mean, I guess I can understand because the romance was incredible. I mean, everything I have ever wanted out of a Fae romance. I rated every book in this series 5 stars. The Cruel Prince blew me away. If I'm being objective, I think The Cruel Prince has to be my favorite in the series. The Wicked King had the most shocking ending of all time to me. And The Queen of Nothing, I guess I gave 5 stars on merit. I don't know that I loved this as much as the other 2 in the trilogy, but I historically have a problem with series enders. I really do struggle with the last book in trilogy specifically, and so this was no exception, but it was so good. I mean, really the ending was absolutely incredible to me. I just love Jude. This is told from Jude's perspective. It's in first person. And Jude is just so angry about all the right things. And I love her. Truly, I do. I just love her. And I loved Carden, her love interest. I really, really liked him. But I'm going to be real with y'all. Carden is Fae, and he has a tail that I am picturing like comes to like having a tuft on the end. That was a jump scare for me every time it was mentioned. I don't know that I can deal with tails. I don't know. So I tried to block that from my mind every time I was reading about him. It's interesting though, because I'm now currently reading a book where a guy has horns, like ram's horns. And I said, you know what? That doesn't bother me. That really doesn't affect me at all. But the tail was something that just caught me every single time it was mentioned. Other than that, I really loved him. I thought he was very, very funny. This series just had a lot going for it. I thought it was humorous in places, but it was really political. It just was very, very rich. The world was so vivid. All of the characters were really interesting. I just can't describe to y'all how much I loved this series. This is my favorite series that I have read so far this year, and in general, I think these are my favorite books that I have read so far this year. Absolutely incredible fiction. I mean, this is why I read. I read to find stuff like this. This was amazing to me. I guess it makes sense that carrying on from that, I would want to read the continuation of the Folk of the Air series. So there is now a duology that is set in the same world and follows characters that were in the Folk of the Air series. And so I picked up The Stolen Heir. You might can tell from my expression that this was a fairly big disappointment to me. I rated this 2 stars. It was a massive step down in quality for me from the Folk of the Air trilogy. And I think a lot of it was that I just did not care for the characters in the same way. I didn't have the initial love for anyone in this book that I had for Jude or for Carden. The main character of this series is very interesting. I don't want to say who it is for spoilers if you haven't read the Folk of the Air trilogy yet, but I thought she just didn't have a very interesting voice. She wasn't a character that I enjoyed spending time with. I didn't enjoy being in her head the way that I enjoyed being with Jude. I would take 600-page novels in Jude's perspective because I love her so much. This character, it took a long time for me to get a handle on her. And then I just felt like very blah about it. It just was very mid to me because I didn't feel like she was that interesting. She wasn't the most interesting character in the novel, and thus she wasn't the one that I wanted to spend time with. And she made some stupid decisions in this. I mean, truly bizarre, stupid decisions. Speaking of horns, the guy in this book also has like a ram's horn, and that doesn't bother me. I don't know. This is interesting. It's interesting to think about the stuff that sticks out to you in Fae books because there's a lot of weird stuff always going on. But the horns, I could kind of get into that. I bet that's cute. But a tail, I just don't know. I don't know. Will I continue on with this? Yes, because it is a duology, so it's kind of 2 and done. And the ending of this was like a pretty big cliffhanger. And by the end, I was really invested and I wanted to know what was coming next. So I will finish this out, but I have to say I was fairly disappointed in this. Coming off of the Folk of the Air trilogy, where all 3 books got 5 stars from me, I mean, this almost felt like it was from a different author. And it's interesting to talk about like Ninth House alongside these books because Ninth House was from an author who I had historically loved, and I didn't like that the first time that I read it. I have historically had a lot of problems with Holly Black's writing. I tried to read her quite a bit before I got on booktube, and she never worked for me. She does not write my favorite Fae. And so I was scared of the Folk of the Air trilogy, really, but suddenly everything that I had a complaint about was gone, and she was writing my favorite Fae of all time. And I feel like this kind of switched back into old gear for her for me. And I don't know what it is about me. I know that most people consider Holly Black the fairy queen, but I really don't. But the Folk of the Air has got to be the best fairy trilogy that I have ever read, so maybe they're right. But sadly, this one was a bit of a disappointment to me. I gave it 2 stars. Let's talk about Emily Henry. I finished out her romances this month, and I just love her. I'm sorry, I can't say enough good things about her. So the one that I want to talk about first is the one that I don't know that I have reviewed anywhere, and that is Happy Place. This is her newest release. This is a second chance romance with fake dating. Like a couple broke up, but they all are in the same friend group. They go on vacation together every year, and they decide to pretend like they are still together in order to keep things nice for kind of their last vacation together as a group. And maybe second chance romances do deserve rights because I loved this. I would say a second chance romance is easily the trope that I am least interested in when it comes to romance. I don't like that. I feel robbed. I'm more interested in the chase than I am with you already being together. Once people get together, once the relationship is formed, interest for me is just in the gutter. I've said it before, I'll say it again, I'm a Sagittarius, okay? It's about the chase for me. If it's a little bit too easy, I'm not interested. And so I just really didn't think I was going to like this. I had the opinion that this would probably be my least favorite one of hers, and I absolutely loved it. I think the characters here were incredibly strong, and I really loved the friend group. This is the first book of Emily Henry's where I have felt like the side characters got as much characterization as the main couple did. Wynne, who is the main male character, easily one of my favorite heroes of hers, but I have to say, I feel like the main female character, whose name I can't even remember, isn't that terrible? I just don't think she was that memorable to me compared to other heroines of Emily Henry's. This is one that I have seen people very split down the middle on, and I can see why. When I was reading it, I thought, I can see that there's going to be a lot of negative reviews of this. It felt very slow. What I just thought was brilliant about it is that even though it was a second chance romance, we were constantly getting flashbacks to when they first got together. And so we were allowed to experience that initial attraction and that initial love that they had for each other. And then we were able to grieve the fact that they broke up alongside them as characters. And thus we were really invested in them getting back together. And I just thought it was really brilliant. I rated this 4 stars. It's a high 4 stars. I don't know how this rates for me among her books. I still feel like People We Meet on Vacation, I think, is my favorite. And then I really loved Book Lovers. I think it's got to be this. And then we have to talk about Beach Read, which is my least favorite of hers and is probably one of my least favorite books that I have read all year. I am so mad about this. Whenever I think about this book, I get angry. This was her first romance, I believe, her first adult romance. And it is about 2 authors who switch genres for the week. They're both kind of in writing ruts, and so they switch genres in order to kind of reinvigorate their love for writing. That is what I have always heard people say is the tagline of this book. But what this book is really about is about like our main character, January, grieving the death of her father, who was cheating on her mother when her mother had cancer. And so there is so much about this that reads to me far more like a literary fiction. To me, the romance was such a secondary plot line to what she was going through as a character. And it's interesting when I'm seeing people talk about Emily Henry and people are like, Gus, the main male character in this, is just like my fantasy man. And I'm thinking, who was he? Who was he really? I feel like I did not know him until the very end. Yes, he had some romantic lines, but to me, he was the most unrealistic of her heroes because I just thought, dude, do you even have a clue what's going on with her? And then I wondered, did I even know him? It was just so weird. And if you want to know, the book was just so heavy for me. I truly was depressed reading it. I did not want to pick it up because I felt like my mood was going to go down every time I thought about reading it. And I think it was true. I feel like every time I read this, I was fairly depressed. So this was just not my favorite of hers. And I am so glad that I did not start here. This would have turned me off of her totally. A lot of her books deal with some kind of sadder or heavier topics, but to me, it isn't to this degree. Happy Place also deals with some really heavy topics, and I've seen a lot of people complain about that they just didn't like the tone of this one. That is a shock to me that you would say that of this, but you wouldn't say it of Beach Read. It's just interesting how we're all different readers, but to me, the heavier topics in this really, really worked because to me, they were unique to the characters and they were unique to how the characters interacted with one another. And it might be that I just didn't feel like I related to these characters that much, that those issues didn't strike me as hard. But Beach Read, to me, something that's talking about grief on that level, I just think can be very, very hard to read. And it just struck me as literary fiction and not as romance. And I've seen a lot of people say that about Emily Henry in general, that they think she should just be talked about as a literary fiction author with romance involved. I don't necessarily think that's true. I do think at the heart, most of her books really are romances, but Beach Read was a unique one for me, and I was sadly very disappointed by it. It almost put me in a reading slump. I gave it, I think, 1 or 2 stars. So that was my June reading wrap up. I would love to know down below if you have read any of these. I would love to know also what you were planning on reading in July. But that's going to be all for me today. I hope you're all having a great week. Happy reading. Goodbye.